The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the Iowa Community of Practice. This is Jessica Craho with the Iowa Coalition for Integration and Employment and a member of your Employment First team. Thanks for joining us today. Really excited about our presentation today and our presenters. Before we get started, just a couple of housekeeping things. We will be recording today's webinar, and we'll be sure to share that along with the materials after the presentation. The evaluation will launch after the webinar is over, so just a couple of quick questions that we always appreciate you answering and giving your feedback on. Please share any questions, comments, feedback in the chat pod. Also, Jackie's going to have like a little short quiz or interactive portion today in the presentation to get us better engaged. So just share those comments in the chat and I'll be sure to let her know your answers and feedback. So again, that's in the control panel, usually along the right-hand side of your screen. Oh, I will put the closed captioning link up, which I didn't do yet, but I'll put that again in the chat pod as we get started here. So if you need closed captioning to participate today, that'll be available. And so I think without further ado, I am going to hand it over to Jackie Pogue, who is the, she works with the IPS Employment Center at Westat, and she's both a practitioner and a trainer in IPS. And our very own favorite Lynn Niblink is going to be joining her today as well and presenting. Lynn is with MHDS, as you know. So we're really happy to have them both. And they're going to take us through some of the basics and the core principles of IPS. And I think maybe give us a little update on what's going on with Iowa and IPS. So without further ado, I will hand it over to the ladies.
Thank you so much, Jess. Can you hear me? Everyone hear me?
Yes, perfect.
Okay, great. Well, my name is Jackie Pogue. Like Jess said, I work for the IPS Employment Center, and I am a research associate, a trainer, and I've been involved in IPS for a long time as an employment specialist and a supervisor and a trainer and reviewer and all that. So my favorite topic. Happy to be here today. I've been working with Lynn this year, which has been lovely. So Lynn and I today are going to talk a little bit about IPS and also IPS in Iowa. And our colleague Sue Ann is here in spirit, so she's on the title slide here, but she's not actually. Is Sue Ann here? I think she is actually. Sorry. Okay, so without further ado, I have a quiz. You guys ready? Let's see here. Okay. I found that graphic on the internet and I'm very pleased with it. It's like really festive. Okay. So first, I'm curious to hear what you know about IPS already. So 1, true or false, IPS doesn't work for people with serious mental illness who have a lot of problems. T or F in the chat box. What do you think? Anybody?
False. False.
I can't actually see anything in the chat box.
Yeah, you're sorry. Yeah, no, I gotcha. So I've got people answering false, false, false.
All right. You are my people. That is correct. It's false. IPS is actually developed for people with serious mental illness who have a lot of problems. And, I think that it's a common misconception that people need to be stable and not have any problems in order to go back to work. But if that were the case, I think very few of us, myself included, would have never gone to work in the first place. Okay, second, true or false, IPS requires that you get someone a job as quickly as possible. T or F?
Oh, I've got a true and a false.
Yeah, this one's tricky. This one's a little trickier than the first one. So IPS has a principle of a rapid job search which is that you help somebody look for a competitive job right away, usually within a month of first meeting with an employment specialist. But it doesn't mean that they need to necessarily get a job as soon as possible. We want to work with people at their own pace. But we do, you know, want them to get a job relatively soon. Otherwise, it's sort of difficult to, you know, that's the main bulk of the employment specialist work, is helping people find jobs and then keep them. Okay, 3, true or false? This is kind of a throwaway. People with mental illness deserve to live full lives in their communities, including meaningful activity, meaningful relationships, and other aspects of recovery. True, right? And I think sometimes we can forget this, and the work that we're doing really focused on, you know, people experiencing a lot of challenges, having a lot of, you know, maybe a lot of hospitalizations, a lot of different challenges, like that. It should be enough for them to be like living in a group home, just hanging out all day, you know, maybe at like a day treatment kind of place. Like that's good enough, right? But I personally, and I think, you know, if you ask people with serious mental illness themselves, like that's not good enough. You know, people should be able to live as full of lives as possible in their community. So that's a big part of the, you know, the rationale why we do what we do. Okay. And the the last one that I took off because I ran out of space is, what does IPS stand for? Does anybody know what the acronym stands for? That's like the extra credit bonus question. And if we were doing this in person, I'd like pass out candy or something, or bookmarks. Anybody in the chat box?
Yes. Individual placement support.
All right, who said it?
Carolyn.
A round of virtual applause. Carolyn, nice job. Thank you. I don't know why I went back to the first slide here. Okay, so I'm going to pass it over to Lynn, and she's going to talk about IPS specifically in Iowa and what's been going on. And then after that, I'm going to talk more in detail about the principles of IPS, the research behind it, and then we can maybe have some discussion and questions. And so pass it to you, Lynn.
Okay, sure. Can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
All right, good. So, first, before I talk about this slide, I just want to mention that Sue Ann is on the title slide because she is my co-lead in this Employment First project. So she deserves as much credit as anyone. So, Iowa's employment vision, you can see here, we talk about employment in the general workforce being the first priority and what we expect and the preferred outcome for the publicly funded services that we provide to working age Iowans with disabilities. I just like to reinforce that message whenever we can. And the next slide. Here you see a colorful map of Iowa. The different colors show you the mental health and disability services regions, which are your local entities that govern local community-based services that are not funded by Medicaid or VR. So they have their own funding that they administer. And we have in Iowa 4 different IPS pilots that have been underway under 2 different initiatives thus far. So up in the northwest corner, the purple counties is the Sioux Rivers region. They're involved in a pilot. The yellow counties are the Northwest Iowa Care Connections region. And then in the central lighter green region, the counties of Franklin, Hamilton, and Hardin are involved in an IPS pilot. And then down in your right-hand corner on the bottom, the light blue Southeast Iowa Link region is involved in IPS pilot. Next slide. So the 2019 focus of these pilots is to bring the IPS model to the select MHDS service regions. because IPS has been shown to work very well for people with serious mental illness and multiple challenges. Next slide. So under the Employment First project, the deliverable that we're aiming for was to provide training and TA on IPS to staff from a community mental health center, an integrated health home provider, and the participating employment service agencies. And the technical assistance is being provided under these two different programs or pilots by in the Southeast Iowa region by Jackie, who we have this webinar from. And then in the northern and the central regions, they've contracted with Claire Courtney out of Minnesota, VR, and Carrie Olsen-Leva out of Minnesota, also a IPS consultant. So we have the 4 MHDS regions involved in the 2 different initiatives. The ones in the northwest and north central started up in 2018, and they're farther along. And then the one in the southeast section has just started up really in 2019. So the positives that we've learned so far out of this, the ones that have been going a little bit longer have had their baseline fidelity reviews, and they have achieved really pretty good scores for how new they are. They also have between 42 and 50% of the clients that are actively involved are actually currently working. Their funding stream, in addition to the money that they get from the MHDS regions, they're getting about 60% from Medicaid from the MCOs and about 40% from voc rehab. We have one location where there's a mental health team that's very well established, and they're making progress on the other locations. There's been some excellent collaboration among the partners, and then we're learning that as IPS becomes more known, then the referrals begin to flow. Next slide. Some of the challenges that we're learning about that are informing the process. Team formation is oftentimes slow and difficult. It helps if team members can be co-located and if we can establish protocols that enable record sharing. Some sites had significant staff turnover early on, and so it felt like they were starting over and over again. In some cases, that staff turnover influenced some positive things that happened because the new staff that they hired then was much more on fire for the IPS model than what the previous staff who had left was. Initially, a number of sites experienced a low number of referrals, so it's been difficult for them to really get things rolling. Need to have a dedicated commitment from the participants. They need to have the time to invest in the model. And then fully funding IPS has been a struggle, enabling providers to have their costs covered, figuring out how to fund the IPS trainer and fidelity reviewers. The sites talk about funding challenges, especially up front, where if you have someone who's not already determined eligible for the MCO funding or for voc rehab, that's, you know, quite a bit of time invested in getting that eligibility to happen. And then also the job development time up front. So without the MHDS region money, these pilots would really be struggling to fund this part of it under Iowa's current payment structure. And then, of course, you always hear about challenges with documentation and with tracking. And again, if you can consolidate some of the record keeping and do like one electronic record would be ideal, or you know, enabling places to use the same application forms and that type of thing, that would be beneficial. Some of the things that we are trying to learn from other states, Sue Ann and I and Amy and others have been talking with other states and, you know, people in other states about how have they done IPS, how have they launched it, what tips do they have for us. So far, we've had conversations with Illinois, who's been doing IPS since 2007. They have a lot of sites across the state. Kentucky since 2010, Colorado 2011. They each have 14 sites across the state. And Utah just started up in 2014, and they have 11 sites. Utah especially emphasized how they started their pilots with one very urban place and one very, they call it frontier, because it was actually in the Native American reservation and very extremely rural and extremely impoverished area of the state. So we are learning what we can from other states and trying to apply that to how we do policy development around IPS for Iowa. And that's all I have about Iowa's pilots. I'm going to hand it back to Jackie.
Okay, great. Thank you, Lynn. So I'm going to go through, a little bit about employment, IPS principles, a little bit about IPS research, and then I hope that we can have questions, conversation. So, why often when I give this presentation to mental health providers or, people who are working in a healthcare setting, like, why focus on employment? Is that a healthcare intervention? Employment is a social determinant of health. Employment and education are seen by many as an essential part of their mental health recovery. And research shows that 60 to 70% of people want to work, but fewer than 15% are employed. So when you think about, I don't think that everybody needs to work, but when you see those kinds of numbers, and that graph there is these different surveys that they've done to get that 60 to 70% range. There's a huge disparity there, right? So that like 45 to 55% of people who want a job but aren't working, many of them, or if not all of them, just like need extra help to get there, right? And so that's what IPS does for a lot of people. We know that work and school are typical roles for adults. Employment is associated with increased income, improved self-esteem and social networks, increased quality of life, better symptom control, and reduced substance abuse. And unemployment, conversely, unemployment can lead to increased poverty, alienation, and apathy, more substance abuse, and more health problems. So, the more that we can get people working, I think that the better it is for them and their lives and, for their health. We also, even if people aren't particularly compelled by the moral imperative or whatever to help people get to work, it is true that steady workers have reduced mental health treatment and public benefit costs. So it makes good financial sense to provide effective employment services because, people do better, and then they don't need as much mental health treatment, and they need like fewer SSI benefits or food stamps or, things like that. So, why IPS? There's a lot of different employment models out there. Why do we care? Why I care about IPS? Because it works the best so far of what we found for people with mental health challenges. And people are almost 2.5 times more likely to get a job with IPS than other vocational approaches. And I'll talk a little bit more about this later, but it's also been shown effective for other groups of people too. And it's a pretty straightforward approach, so it makes sense that it works with a lot of different people. But we've done research studies specifically for people receiving temporary aid to needy families, people with substance use disorders, post-traumatic stress disorder, spinal cord injuries, older adults, people who are homeless, people with criminal justice involvement, and young adults. And I think that list continues to grow. Interestingly, the VA has done a lot of research on IPS for people with PTSD, or veterans with PTSD, and also veterans with spinal cord injuries. So that research, their work, I think, is really interesting. So here's some quotes from IPS clients. Those are stock photos on the side, but I used to be a trainer and contract manager in the Bay Area in California, and one of the favorite things that I did was I put together this newsletter, and I did some different success story sharing and all that. So I'd interview people and write up little stories. And so these are quotes from real people I met face to face. I'm respected now. I don't wake up mad and upset anymore. I like making money to help my family pay the bills. I'm doing exactly what I want to be doing. Now there is more peace and certainty in my life. I like being in mainstream society as opposed to living a sheltered life. I really, the person who said that, he had not worked in like 25 years. He'd been living in a boarding care, like a congregate living, supported living kind of environment, in and out of the hospital, just kind of not super engaged, right, in his community. And he was one of our first IPS clients in our program in one of the programs out there. And by the time I met him, he'd worked like 3 different jobs, and he was going, he had, initially worked like a couple weeks, and he'd been slowly kind of figuring out what he wanted to do. And by the time I met him, he was working 2 jobs and going to school to be a medical translator, because his first language was Spanish. And I just thought that was really cool that he, he had this real contrast, and he's like, it's harder. I have more responsibility, but it's so much better. Working helps me manage my depression. My mood is more positive. I feel like I have a purpose now. Every day I get up feeling good that I have a job. And I feel better about myself now that I'm working and contributing to society. And, I think that a lot of us, we work because we need money, right? Like we need to live our lives, but there are so many non-monetary benefits to working too. And I think that those are often like equally as important to the folks that we're helping. Not to minimize the impact of money, which is really helpful, especially for the folks that we're serving, because most of them live, in some pretty intense poverty. And so, okay, so, IPS was developed in the late 80s, early 90s by my colleagues, Bob Drake and Debbie Becker. And since then, there's been a lot of research done on it. It's spread around the world. And, it has a fidelity scale that has 25 items. It's, it's very standardized. And under, sort of the foundation of that is these 8 practice principles. So I liked, rather than bore you to death with like every fidelity item, I think that going through these practice principles gives you a good sense of the theoretical framework of what we're doing, and also the just kind of understanding what the model is like. So that's my stock photo of a guy and working at a grocery store, and I'm really happy I found it. He looks so cheerful. So I'm just going to put, so the first 4 practice principles. The first one is a little bit jargony, but we call zero exclusion. So eligibility in services is based on the person's choice. And so this is the idea that, even if somebody is having a lot of personal problems, or their illness is significant, or they are using drugs or alcohol or whatever, we don't, if they want to get a job soon, then we will bring them into IPS. So we work on those issues concurrently with the job search and, job retention. And the idea behind this is that often, people, like, it's like, okay, well, we need to wait until you take a shower every day and then you can get help finding a job. Like, or you need to stop drinking and be sober for a while, and then we'll help you look. But what happens for a lot of people is then they just don't ever do it, right? And so they never get a chance to look for a job. And working, when somebody has a job, that's often very motivating for them to work on their other problems, right? And so I've seen that happen over and over, right? Like where all of a sudden people have something within their grasp that they really want, and it encourages them to make some changes that they maybe didn't have the will to do before. So, it's like, okay, well, I will cut my hair because I really want this job. I want that job more than I want my like raggedy hair or and then also that for some people they're just not going to quit drinking, and they're not going to take a shower every day. And so that's where helping people find jobs that work within their challenges and focus on their strengths. So help, if somebody has really poor hygiene, we would help them look for a job where that doesn't matter. And or if somebody stays up late drinking every night and can't get up in the morning, then we would help them look for a job that starts in the afternoon. So pretty kind of basic stuff like that. Zero exclusion can be really challenging to practice, and it's I think something to look at in your own program if you're an employment service provider, or if you're a mental health program, or what, just thinking of, we know that motivation to work is a strong predictor of employment success, and the different personal factors are not really. Like when we've looked at the research, there's no correlation between if people are using substances and that they're less likely to get a job. They're not. So, okay. Second is IPS services are closely integrated with mental health treatment. So this kind of plays out in that the employment specialist goes to weekly clinical team meetings, stays for the whole time. They talk about shared clients. They might get new referrals. They have office space that's close to each other. They, ideally have like a shared treatment record. They're in it with the mental health team. This helps people be more successful, clients be more successful, because there's a really quick sharing of information. Everyone's on the same page. We help people look for competitive jobs and, like regular school programs. That's the goal. So IPS is really focused on helping people get jobs that anybody can get, that pay at least minimum wage, that are not set aside for people with disabilities. And so that happens right away. So it's not that people need to do a transitional work program or work in a sheltered workshop or volunteer first to prove that they can work. We help people look for regular jobs right away. And that, it's the idea that as a work-based vocational assessment, we help people, work out there like most of us did, right? Like, I made some really dumb mistakes on my first job when I was 16, and then I made fewer different dumb mistakes in my second job when I was 18. And, like you develop over time, and the close collaboration with the employment specialists and other folks, we try to help people be as successful as possible. We provide personalized benefits and work incentives planning for people. So if they're on SSI, SSDI, Medicaid, all these different, like they all have different like work rules, earned income rules. You have to report your income. It's complicated. A lot of people, it took a lot of effort for them to get on benefits in the first place. They're really scared of losing them. So we help people get personalized information about how working is going to impact their situation. And that's not to say, oh, well, you can only work 20 hours a week or something like that. It's, around empowering somebody to make financial, like figure out their financial situation. And if they have a representative payee, they have other people in their life that are tied to their finances, like hopefully then they would also be included in that, so they can all be on the same page. When this doesn't happen, what can happen is people end up not reporting their income to Social Security. They end up with a big overpayment that they have to pay back. That's really demoralizing for people and scary. They can have their first, Social Security check get reduced, and they freak out and they quit their job. So just helping somebody manage that piece And recognizing that, Social Security and these other benefits, that's this person's safety net, and so we don't want to be cavalier with that. We want to help people be really planful. Other practice principles. So the job search starts soon after someone expresses interest in working. So usually within 30 days of meeting with the employment specialist for the first time, we're helping them make in-person contact with employers. The IPS specialist, employment specialists, develop relationships with employers and schools based on people's preferences. So they're out making in-person contacts with hiring managers based on, the folks that they're working with, what kind of jobs they want. And for me, that's like a super fun part about doing this job is, at one point I had a guy on my caseload, like when I first started in IPS, he hadn't worked since before I was born, and he had like 6 months of dishwashing experience, and he knew he didn't want to do that. And then I had another guy who had an MBA from the University of Chicago, and he'd run his own software company and had really, really bad bipolar disorder and didn't leave his house for like 2 years and lost everything. And he was he was trying to put his life back together. And I was like, I didn't know anything about computer software, but I learned, and, we worked together, and I talked to some employers and schools, and, so it's fun to explore a variety of types of jobs for people based on what they want. And once people are working, we help them keep their job, hopefully for as long as they want, until they're like stable and happy in their job. Generally, we try to provide ongoing follow-along support. And then lastly, and I sort of see like this is the ultimate principle, not that they're ranked, but that we honor people's preferences for the types of jobs that they want, or how they want the services to be delivered, so it's not like everybody needs to disclose and everybody needs job coaching and everybody should do like part-time service industry work to start. We talk with people about what they want to do, what they think they're good at, what they've always been curious about. And then also if they're like, I want to meet in the afternoon because I sleep till 11 every day, then we meet them in the afternoon. We don't need to meet everybody at 8:30 in the morning or something like that. So there's my one cartoon. I'd hate to have a job where you had to get up early in the morning. I'd hate to have a job where you stayed in the same place all day. And then Lucy says, I'd hate to have a job where you have to be nice to everybody. And I think one really cool part about doing employment-related work is that, the labor market is so it's really flexible. There's a lot of really random jobs out there. And I didn't realize that until I got into it, where, once you turn that part on in your brain where you're like looking at the world around you, like, oh, that's somebody's job. Like, who does that? And it's fun. It's fun to go out and like try to find different jobs that like work for people. And there, once you're in employment services for a while, there's always like really random stuff, which I love. So those are the practice principles. And I'm going to kind of move into the research evidence. And then let's keep going. Okay, so there's been a lot of research done on IPS.
Sorry to interrupt you, Jackie. This is Jess, and I thought maybe before you move on, there was a question around benefits. And the question is...
Oh, great.
Yes. Do you have in-house benefits planners, or do you refer out to outside agencies?
Good question. This is an ongoing challenge, I think, in a lot of places. It just depends on the resources of the area. So in general, in an IPS program often does not have their own benefits counselor, because it's usually somebody that needs a lot of training. I mean, once you get into the benefit stuff, it's really complicated, and there's a lot of rules and nuance. And if you aren't using that information very often, it's just hard to remember, right? And most of us, like in human service, didn't come into this field because we have like outstanding math skills, right? And so it's not necessarily a gift of a lot of us to go through all this stuff with people. So that's the short of it is that benefits counseling is provided by a lot of different people, and it's a task of a local area to figure out where they're, and as you're developing IPS services, where are people going to get the benefits counseling, and does the benefits counseling resource, like, do they know enough, right, to be able to provide individualized, comprehensive benefits counseling? Like, do they need more training and resources? So often VR is often has benefits counselors. So if people are clients of VR, they can get it from them. Sometimes an agency will train one other people. Often, I'm trying to think. When I was in the Bay Area, the county, we contracted with the Center for Independent Living to do the benefits counseling. Social Security, I'm not sure what the current status is, but they have a network of work incentives planners. So sometimes they're a great resource. Often, like the Centers for Independent Living, they have people who are really good at that. So I don't know if anybody from the IPS pilot sites are part of this training, but I'm curious if, like, what benefits counseling resources people are currently using.
And that question actually came from Misty Johnson, one of our wonderful WIPAs here in the state. And so,
oh, cool.
Right?
So yeah,
yes. So you're right. That would be a great resource. Right? But like you said, our VR agency also has benefits planners on staff that can be a good resource. And there's also a number of CRPs across the state that also have trained and employ benefits planners too.
Yeah.
She reminds us that the Ticket to Work helpline can also get people connected to benefits planners as well.
Really?
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
Right? I'll make sure I
Cool. Thank you.
Yeah, share that phone number. Yes, thank you, Misty.
Awesome. Any other questions or before we move on?
Not right now. Thank you.
Okay, cool. So there's been a lot of research done on IPS, including 26 randomized controlled trials, and an RCT is, there's varying design, there's different designs of research studies, and an RCT is one of the most sort of scientifically sound and effective ways of evaluating if an intervention works. And generally how it works is people are randomly assigned to IPS or a different employment service, and then they are tracked over time, over a certain period of time, and then they look, see which work better. So there's been 12 studies in the U.S., 14 outside of the U.S. 2/3 of them had at least an 18-month follow-up. 5,800 people in these different studies. And in most of them, the control group, so the group that didn't get IPS, received, services as usual, sometimes best practices, just kind of like what would generally people would get in that area in the first place. So here's like tiny print of all the different studies and the location, the control group. So you can see is like referrals to VR, traditional voc rehab, a sheltered workshop, transitional work programs, different things like that. And then the study population eligibility criteria. So it's mostly like people in community mental health centers, some of them, early psychosis programs. Some of them have more specific demographics, like people with criminal justice involvement, veterans. Okay, so then here's the graph of all the RCTs. So you can see that the black line is IPS, the red line is the control group services, and then there's like 4 in Connecticut here. They had 2 control groups, so they're like the overachievers. And you can see that IPS, so this is the competitive employment rate. So the percentage of people who worked at any time during the study compared. And so you can see that IPS worked better for all of them. And, it varies, right? So like this one here, the control group services worked pretty well too. And like down here and, in the UK, like the outcomes were not good kind of overall. I was talking to one of my colleagues about that study, and I don't know if it was this study, one of these like low performers, and they said that they enrolled a bunch of people in the study who didn't have an employment goal. So it makes sense that they was lower. Okay. So the overall findings, 25 of 26 showed a significant advantage for IPS. There's one in China that's borderline significant. The mean competitive employment rate, 55% for IPS, 23% for control group services. So this is why I care. This is why I'm all into IPS, is because it works better. And if something else comes along that works better, I'm going to be all about that too. You can see, so sometimes it's like, well, you help people get jobs, but they don't keep them, or they don't work as long because you're trying to rush people into getting employment. So my colleague Gary Bond did a study where they looked at 4 of the trials, and the employment outcomes, and this graph shows that a lot more people got jobs in the first place. A lot more of them worked at least half time. They got jobs faster. They worked like 4 times as many hours, and they made more money. So that's cool. We've seen that it works pretty well. It makes sense, right? Like all the practice principles. Somebody says they want a job, you work with them one-on-one, you help them find it, you talk to employers for them. Once they get a job, you try to help them keep it. You try to like not put up more obstacles that are already in that person's way. So, it makes sense that it works across like different subgroups of people with serious mental illness, different ages, genders, racial and ethnic backgrounds, no work history, lots of work history, people have been in the hospital a lot. And then, they've been starting to do more research on IPS for other populations. So spinal cord injuries, autism, intellectual disabilities, substance use disorders without having mental illness, what the Europeans call common mental disorders. So you might be like anxiety or mild, moderate depression, chronic medical conditions. So there's been some in Europe where they're looking at people with chronic pain, and then TANF. So this is a look at some of those studies. My colleague Gary and I and Bob Drake, we did a systematic review of all these studies earlier this year. Happy to send it to you if you really want to nerd out. But so you can see that the IPS services is the black line, control group is the gray, and that it's a lot more variable around effectiveness. And also several of these like heavily adapted IPS. So they might have included other interventions too, like cognitive behavioral therapy or other stuff. And then some of them, like a lot of these are in Europe, and they just have like a different health system than we do. So anyway, so IPS has a fidelity scale. It has 25 items. We see it as a quality improvement tool. It's shown to higher fidelity to IPS leads to more competitive employment outcomes. And I love doing fidelity reviews. It's really fun. So it's an opportunity to go into a program and do a lot of interviews, sit in on meetings, look at client charts, go visit with some employers with the employment specialist, like really dig in and see how things are going, and then be able to offer some feedback about ways to improve. So our center, we manage a IPS learning community, and it's a quality improvement, collaborative learning community with 24 states or regions in the U.S., 6 countries outside the U.S., and it's a really fun group of people. And then like 400 programs submit data to us quarterly around their outcomes. And so last quarter, about 20,000 people were a part of that. So like Lynn was mentioning at the beginning, talking to Utah and Kentucky, Colorado, Illinois, those are all states here. You can see that are in our Learning Collaborative. Now, Iowa's not a part of it, but I feel like you guys would be a really good candidate here and wonderful to be a part of it because you could kind of have this Minnesota, Wisconsin, Illinois, Missouri like block there, like a real conglomeration of IPS power. We have a meeting every year. This is our group photo. This year it was in May in Denver. It rotates around to different states. And so let's see, what time is it? 2:48. I just want to go over just a tiny bit about the role of the employment specialist and the supervisor, and then we can open it up if anybody has any questions. So you can conceptualize the service that there's, there's one employment specialist. They provide only employment services and education services, and they provide all the phases of the vocational service for each person. So if I get somebody on my caseload, to help them look for a job, I'm going to help them look for it. Once they get it, I'm going to help them keep it. So people don't get passed, to different, like to a job coach or whatever once they get working. Every employment specialist or IPS specialist does all the things. So that means they have a caseload of a small caseload, of up to 20 people at a time who are usually at varied stages of job searching, job retention, or in school. They spend at least 65% of their work week in the community providing services and job developing. So they're not in the office a lot. I think that translates to like 28 hours in the field, and that they're included as a full member of the clinical team that they work with and attend meetings and all that good stuff. And that IPS, has a really active supervision component. So the IPS supervisor, is often like a vocational program manager, maybe a program manager or director for a clinical team, like if the employment services are provided by someone within the same agency. So this person may have other responsibilities, but for the IPS part, they provide weekly supervision. If they're supervising more than one employment specialist, they also provide a weekly IPS team meeting. And in the team meeting, they, talk about client stuff and share about outcomes and job development. The supervisor for each of their staff do visit employers together. So they do field-based supervision. They track data and outcomes and report quarterly, and they help with the clinical team integration, helping solve any problems that might be going on there, and being a cheerleader about work. So that's our office dog, Oslo. He's wonderful. And I put him on the slide because everybody loves pictures of dogs. So I'm curious, does anybody have any questions or feedback, anything you want to talk about in our last 10 minutes here?
We'll wait here and give a chance to type here.
Pardon?
I said we'll wait and give people a chance to type here.
Yeah, totally. If you go to our website, it's ipsworks.org. We put Oslo on our staff page, so he's on there as like a research assistant in training. And I think that's actually his picture on there, and that really makes me happy to see him on there. He's so cute. I don't personally have any pets, so it's perfect to have an office dog.
Oh, that's lovely.
Like all the love but no responsibility.
It's like having grandkids, I think.
Yeah, totally. That's funny.
And I suppose too, we could give folks a brief update. You kind of mentioned maybe future work around IPS, and Iowa did submit the SAMHSA grant application, right, to do some more pilot work here in the state and kind of support our systems change and learning and stuff around IPS and how our systems of practice and training and funding can better support such a model across the state. And so Jackie and like she said, her team and colleagues were incredibly helpful and supportive throughout that process. And I think Iowa is very competitive for that grant. So we'll see what happens. It sounds like, if I remember right, Jackie, that's an October 1 start date. So
yeah,
right. So we'll know
let us know
in September or October, right?
Yeah.
So that's very exciting. Very exciting. Okay, I have some great questions here. Is there specific documentation required for IPS, client documentation specifically?
There is, we have a variety of forms, and I'm happy to email them to you. At some point, I just combine them all into a Word document. But so we have a career profile, which is just a simple vocational assessment tool that we do with people when we first start working with them. And then there's some different update type forms. So like if somebody gets a job, like a job start form, a job end form, we do a job search plan, follow along plan once they start working. So that's that kind of simple stuff. And we have, if you go to ipsworks.org, we have a library and all those documents are in there, but most of them are PDFs. So that's a bummer. If you just want to like pirate them, you have to like either handwrite them or whatever. But I have them all in a Word document. I'm happy to email them to you.
Yes, I was going to say I can share that with the mailing list. Yeah, I can.
Sure, yeah.
With the
and here's my contact info too.
Oh, perfect.
So nothing extraordinary. Just like kind of simple documentation. And then we have different things that we want the supervisor to track. And for like a super low tech, tiny startup program, you can just do it in an Excel spreadsheet. It's very simple. For bigger, more technological savvy places, we'll help them build it. You can build it into your electronic health record. You can, whatever kind of system you're currently using.
Nice.
Other questions?
I don't see any more coming in.
Okay.
There we go. How do you see IPS fitting with VR menu of services or assessment services like Discovery?
It's a great question. Most like a partnership with VR is a part of this model, and that looks different in different places. So like in Illinois, VR pretty much funds all of the IPS services there, and they actually like made an IPS service in their manual. So they have like special milestones and funding and whatever. A lot of places will just include it as a supported employment service. So it's, like part of that category or package, or can't quite remember the term. And I think that it's compatible with a discovery process. I mean, it's very similar to discovery. I mean, we try to get information from other people in the person's life around like what they're good at and what they're interested in and whatever. It's a kind of a different population of folks than, like folks with, but there's a lot of similarities. But, like if somebody's not very verbal and, has some communication challenges, then that becomes even more important to get information right from other people in their life. Whereas a lot of the clients like with serious mental illness are, often are pretty straightforward about what they want. And so it's still good to get that other information, but it really just ends up playing out on a person by person basis.
Yeah, I think
VR is an essential partner because VR. There's so many resources, that they're trained rehabilitation counselors. A lot of people have like comorbid health conditions, and so I've found that VR can be so helpful. Like where somebody's like, oh, this person can't stand for very long or whatever, and the VR counselor has like a million ideas, and that I think is really useful. And then especially around career development, I found that VR is a really great resource for that too, along with all kinds of other stuff. But
Yeah, I just want to echo what you said, Jackie, that many of those 8 practice principles that you reviewed today are similar to those in Discovery. And
yeah.
if I understand right, you can, though you may be using an IPS model or strategy to get someone to work, you can still be doing the components of Discovery kind of throughout that process, or even as somebody is working, to continue to kind of learn about them and move them along their career path. And
Yeah, I don't know a ton about customized employment. Like, I haven't had a lot of direct experience with it, but I've heard from people who do that they see them like compatible and similar.
Right, yeah. And I think other states are kind of feeling that out and kind of seeing what that looks like.
Yeah.
I don't, kind of as we learn and kind of master, right, both of those approaches.
Yeah,
So,
totally.
Yeah. Well, I'll wait here to see if any other questions come in. But it looks like, you guys shared your contact information. You're happy to have people reach out to you, I'm sure.
Lynn, do you have anything you want to add here at the end? Not to put you on the spot, but.
I do not, really. I think we've covered it quite well. Thank you.
Sure. Well, it's been a real treat. Thank you so much, everyone. And feel free to reach out if you have questions or whatever.
Yeah, thank you so much, Jackie. It was a really great presentation. And, as we kind of continue to expand and learn here in Iowa, I think it's great to cover the things that you talked about today, even if we've maybe heard them before. It's great to kind of keep hearing those things and be thinking about them. Again, as we learn and expand here in Iowa, we'll be sure to keep everybody posted on if Iowa is awarded the SAMHSA grant and kind of what that looks like. Oh, thank you. Okay, just gotta thank you. Thank you, Misty, and thank you to everybody else who was on today and listening and engaged. I also want to thank the DD Council for their continued investment in the community of practice, along with the Iowa Association of Community Providers for lending us their platform and hosting us. Thank you, Brita. Again, I just want to remind you that the evaluation or the short survey questions will launch right after the webinar. Please be sure to answer those and take those. We pay attention to those and kind of help shape our future work and topics around your feedback. I'll be sure to share the recording, Jackie's presentation, as well as that documentation piece that we talked about earlier. Jackie will send that to me and I'll kind of get that out through the larger email list. We will be back August 20th. Believe it or not, we only have 2 more webinars left this year. August 20th from 1 to 2 p.m. will be Role of the Job Coach, and we'll have the wonderful Dr. Sue-Ann Morrow hosting with Leanne Russo. That'll be great. And then in September, we're going to do Future Ready Iowa. And actually, that has changed. Originally, that September date was set for the 17th. It is now set for September 24th, so as not to conflict with Iowa APSE, which is September 16th and 17th. So if you didn't know that, get that on your calendars. Again, APSE, Iowa APSE, September 16th and 17th, and then our last community of practice will be September 24th, in which we'll host Kathy Leggett on Future Ready Iowa. So looking forward to having you, and let me know if you need a certificate for your participation today. I'll get that to you as soon as I can, along with the materials, including the recording. So everybody have a great rest of the week. Stay cool as the temperatures rise here. Please don't melt. And we will talk to you all, see you all very soon. Thanks again, Jackie and Lynn.
Thank you.
Thank you. Take care. Bye, everybody.